Hi everyone, so I'm Joseph Michael, and what I've been thinking about recently is the unfortunate closure of the Nintendo eShop. If one lives in Europe, that's actually going to happen today, March 26th. I'm not going to post this video until Wednesday, so by the time this video releases, the eShop will already have been closed. For North America, the eShop closes tomorrow, March 27th at 5 p.m. And I just wanted to discuss it because it feels a little bit, as dramatic as it sounds, a little bit surreal. I personally have owned a 3DS ever since Fire Emblem Awakening was announced. When that game was released, I owned my 3DS. And although I am a bigger fan of Sony's PlayStation, and I do play more home consoles than I do handheld games, such as the Xbox and my Switch, I always did have a soft spot in my heart for the 2DS because I did grow up with the Game Boy. Well, not the 2DS, but just for Nintendo's handhelds, because I did grow up with the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance. Once I got into high school, though, when the DS came out, that's when I kind of fell off the bandwagon. But when the 3DS came out, I was in college during that time, and I kind of knew what I did like, what I didn't like. When I was younger, I kind of just bought most games, but by that point, I was in college. I knew and recognized that I was a big RPG slash JRPG fan. And but again, that's why I got the 3DS in the first place. Was for Fire Emblem Awakening. And yes, so the 3DS was officially discontinued on September 16th, 2020. I suppose technically that's the death of the 3DS, but I can't help but feel like the closure of the eShop, that's the death of the 3DS. I'm putting death in quotation marks because obviously, as long as the individuals who own the consoles, the handhelds, if we keep playing them, if we keep discussing the games, it's not truly dead, right? All the games that I bought digitally from the eShop, I am planning to, when I do eventually play it, I am planning to do a brief review video on those games. Like, for example, Castlevania 3, Metroid 2, Pokemon Crystal, and so forth, right? I'm not going to lie, I'm actually kind of looking forward to it too, just because I'm very used to playing story-driven games. Sometimes it could be a little bit daunting, not daunting in terms of the narration or the gameplay or the themes that the story is presenting, but just daunting because you can't just turn on the game and start playing. You have to turn on the game, recall where you left off, get yourself ready if you're about to do a mission or start a side quest of some sort, go speak with someone, right? I think that's more true of most games today. The nice thing about games from the past and for handheld games is that typically you just pop the game in and you start playing, even when they are RPGs such as Fire Emblem, um, or codename Steam and so forth, right? I guess those are more SRPGs than proper RPGs. But one knows what I mean, right? When one compares Dragon Quest 7 or 8, well, I don't even know what I was going to say the first time. But Dragon Quest 7 and 8 and compare that to the newest Dragon Quest 12, I would argue it's just a little bit more difficult just to pick it up and start playing again, because of the extra elements that Dragon Quest 12 has. But with that being said, it's not like Dragon Quest 12. They actually do a really great job of when one starts playing it, they do have a little description of where one left off. Oh no, wait. Yeah, I believe they do have that. Excuse me. I was just thinking out loud. Anywho, but going back to the 2DS 3DS, but yeah, it is very unfortunate. I am of the mind. I do understand and recognize that maintaining these stories is not free. There is some maintenance and monetary fee that goes into maintaining that as well. But a really good example I have of this to support what I'm about to say, I don't think it's probably that expensive, and it's Nintendo. I have a feeling they could probably afford it. And the example I'm going to use for this is actually Guild Wars. So Guild Wars 2 is an MMORPG, but a lot of the Guild Wars, or rather Guild Wars 1, a lot of those fans did not move on to Guild Wars 2 just because the game was different, very different compared to the first one. Does one have the option of playing the first one? You would think probably not, right? It's an MMORPG, but surprisingly, it's still available for purchase. You could play it, not just the base game, but all the expansions. And ArenaNet, the developers for Guild Wars, they have come out and said that they are planning to not shut it down. As long as they're around, they're going to maintain it. It's not very expensive to do so. And if a publisher like ArenaNet, or developer, excuse me, I get those two confused, but if they could do it, I don't see why Nintendo can't do it as well. But I know I'm doing a false equivalency. I'm comparing one game compared to a system of purchasing games. So maybe it's not the same things. So maybe I'm just being a little bit rude or just selfish when I say that. But again, I did have so when it came to the announcement, the eShop, Nintendo eShop 3DS closure, it was a little bit disappointing. But thankfully, up to that point, I already had most of the games that I wanted to purchase already. The reason being because of the PS3 closure. So when Sony announced about a year or year and a half ago that that was going to be shut down, the PSN store, there was a lot of games, both full games and DLC that I had yet to have purchased, and it did put me on high alert. But thankfully, Sony, when they realized that a lot of people actually still purchase games on the storefronts for both the PS3 and the Vita, they made the option to go ahead and keep it open. Unfortunately for the PSP, that didn't survive. That storefront was still closed. But thankfully for the PS3 and Vita, that's still open with some stipulations, of course. But unfortunately with Nintendo, they didn't go back on what they stated. But thankfully, unlike Sony just said, we're going to close the store in about 2 to 3 months, I believe it was. Not much time. But then again, thankfully, they did go back on that. But because of that scare, anything that I want to own digitally, be it for Sony, Xbox, Microsoft, Steam, and Nintendo, I decided to go ahead and stop putting it off and to start purchasing those games. And unfortunately, one of the casualties of putting it off was Project X Zone 2. So that's a game that used to be part of Nintendo's eShop, but unfortunately got delisted. That does bum me out a little bit. It's not the best game, but I do own the first one. And I'm a big fan of when I own something. If it's not bad, it got decent reviews, I like to have the sequel as well, just to see the differences between the original and the later releases. That's probably one of the few games that I regret not getting, Project X Zone 2. But besides for that, I do own the games that I do want to own. Also, this past Sunday, I did post a brief review for the Nintendo 2DS. I'm not going to say 3DS because I own the 2DS. And in that video, I do have towards the end, I list all the games that I own for my 2DS, both physically and digitally. So I'm not going to do that again. But what I'm going to do instead is just list the games that I decided to buy during this past week. So I am looking at a list, and I'm just going to go through it. And when I see one, I'll Kid Icarus Uprising, Luigi's Mansion, Mario and Luigi Dream Team. So for Mario and Luigi Saga plus Minions and Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey, I did buy those about a year ago. Again, after the PS3 closure, the PSN store closure. It motivated me to start purchasing games. But the one that I did not purchase was Mario and Luigi Dream Team, and also Mario and Luigi Paper Jam, because I've heard that in terms of RPG elements, they're not the best, and also in terms of story, it's just not all there. But when it comes to Mario and Luigi Dream Team, what pushed me to get this is that the music, the composer, it's Yoko. Let me just look her up really quickly. Pardon me. I was close, kind of. Yoko Shimomura, excuse me, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. But she did the music for Kingdom Hearts. And I actually really do enjoy the soundtrack for that. And she also did the soundtrack for Radiant Hysteria. Man, really great soundtrack. I love it a lot. So that's basically the only reason why I got Mario and Luigi Dream Team was for the soundtrack. Let me go back to my list. Metroid Samus Returns. I decided to get that because my 2DS does have the Ambassador program, so I do have Metroid Fusion. I'm not a big fan of Switch's one needs to pay for the subscription to have access to the games for the virtual console. I much prefer just to own it and to play it when I want to play it. So I got Metroid 2 Samus, I guess it's not called Metroid 2, excuse me, it's a remake. Metroid Samus Returns, even though it is a sequel, because I do want to play it eventually and I don't want to regret not owning it. And I do have Samus Returns, I'm sorry, I do have Fusion and I do have Metroid Dread for my Switch. I went like this because my Switch is over there. So I didn't want to miss out the boat or have any regrets. So I already do own Pokemon X, Alpha, Sapphire, Moon, Ultra Sun. But what I also ended up purchasing are the opposite versions of that. I didn't mention that in my other video just because they're actually really new purchases. I just did that. Today is Sunday. I just purchased that on Saturday yesterday. When I post this video, it's going to be Wednesday. So a little bit more days than just yesterday, 3 to 4 days. And the reason why I decided to double dip with Pokemon is just for I'm not a big fan of I stopped playing Pokemon when network features got implemented and being able to trade with people around the world. So I don't know, I don't have any experience with utilizing that, and I don't want to. I'm not a big fan of completing the Pokédex, but that's one of the things that I'm kind of aiming to do. It's not a goal, and I'm not going to aim to complete the full Pokédex for each version, but I do want to just capture them and just complete my Pokédex. That was something I never really did. Fill out my Pokédex. That was something I never did when I was young. I would just catch what I wanted and that's it, and train them and that's it, and just defeat the other Pokemon. But this time I really want to focus on the capture aspect of Pokemon. So that's why I made the choice to get Y, Omega Ruby, Ultra Moon. It was for that reason. And I originally have Moon and Ultra Sun because it's the opposite of one another. Personally, for me, I would have gone with Ultra Moon. But again, during that time, I did that on purpose. But I'm happy because I own each version anyway. So moving on. So I did buy some DLC for Apocalypse, Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, and also for the 4th Shin Megami Tensei as well. I already owned most of the DLC that I wanted though for the 4th one. That's why I kind of skipped over it or glossed over it. I also did get the DLC for Devil Summoner 2. Stellar Glow. So that's, again, I'm not usually into the chibi art style, but I got that because I do own Alliance Alive for my PS4, which kind of has a chibi art style. And when I was looking into this past week, give or take, looking into just any hidden gems I might regret not owning, that game kept popping up, so that's why I decided to go ahead and go for it. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. I never completed a 3D Zelda game. The only game from Zelda that I've beaten has been the Minish Cap, and I did have a Game Shark for that too. So it took me so long to get Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time just because I was unsure if I would ever play it. But as the eShop closure got closer, I realized to myself, I'd rather own it and not play it, maybe play it in the future, rather than not own it and want to play it but not be able to unless I want to buy the physical copies. And well, as we know, the physical copies for 3DS and DS games are not really inexpensive. They're not really affordable, right? So better safe than sorry. With that being said, I do own most of the other handheld Zelda games, and I do have Breath of the Wild as well, and also Skyward Sword, the remastered. And I am hoping for Twilight Princess and Wind Waker to be remastered on the Switch as well. And I also do own 7th Dragon 3 Code VFD. I decided to get that during this past week because I've heard mixed reviews about that, but from what I've heard, it seems like something that I would enjoy. It kind of has a chibi art style a little bit, but I already have Stellar Glow, so I figured to myself, hey, I have that, let's go with this too as well. Moving on, so that's the 3DS full games, or rather 3DS games made for the 3DS. I'm moving on to Virtual Console games now, both just the regular Virtual Console and the new Nintendo the new 3DS Virtual Console. I'm only going to list the ones that I bought. Again, if one wants a full list of what I own, that is on the my brief review of the new Nintendo 3DS. Castlevania 3, Defenders of Oasis, Donkey Kong Country 1 through 3. I decided to get those. I do know Castlevania is on PS4, but to be frank and honest with everyone, I do use the save states a lot. I was going to say the save feature. The save states a lot. Probably a little bit too much, too often. And although I do record my gameplay on the PS4 and Xbox, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit embarrassed just to capture myself save scumming all the time. So I think I much rather prefer to play that on my 3DS. Excuse me. And also, to be frank with everyone, I kind of don't have any desire to play Castlevania 1 and 2 just because I know that I know they have a semblance of a story, but it's not properly presented within the game itself. And then for Donkey Kong Country 1 through 3, I personally grew up with Donkey Kong Country 2. And again, just like with The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, I'd rather own it and be able to play it than not own it and regret not being able to play it. So I did play a little bit of Donkey Kong Country 1 when I was young. but I never personally owned it myself. And for Donkey Kong Country 3, I never played that at all, so that's pretty fun. Gargoyle's Quest and Gargoyle's Quest 2. Since I got Castlevania, I decided I hear great things about that series, so I wanted to check it out. And Demon's Quest, that's actually the sequel to Gargoyle Quest 2. It just has a different name, Demon's Quest. I believe it's called something different because Demon's Quest is a prequel, but I might be wrong about that. Lufia for the Game Boy Color. I think it's called Lufia, The Legend Returns. I do have Lufia for my PSP/Vita because you can play on the Vita. But it took me so long to get this one because, again, like with Seventh Dragon, I heard mixed reviews, but I decided to put the bullet. Kirby Dream Land 1 and 2. I did have the second one when I was a kid, so for nostalgic purposes. Excuse me, everyone. Let me drink some water really quickly. Sorry about that. I need to clear my throat. Excuse me. Thank you for your patience, though. Mario Golf, Mario Tennis. So I never played golf personally, but when it came to Mario Tennis as a kid, I did play Advanced Mario Tennis. And the reason why I picked it up is because it was actually an RPG. And it was actually a really fun game. I really enjoyed it. And Mario Golf is made by the same people who made Mario Tennis. And so I decided to branch out a little bit. Who knows, maybe I'm going to be a big fan of that. Mega Man for the Game Boy, Mega Man 5. I decided to get that one and not the other Mega Man games for the Game Boy or Game Boy Color because Mega Man 5 is its own, it's its own iteration. And what that means is that the game was made specifically for the Game Boy and it has its own unique story to it as well. Ninja Gaiden 1 through 3. Since I had Castlevania, I decided it always was a game I wanted to check out, especially because of the soundtrack. And the story always sounded kind of fun. It's a revenge story. And yeah, so I decided to put the bullet because it has save states anyways. Pokemon, the trading card game. I don't play the trading card game, but I decided to get the Game Boy Color game because sometimes I have a hankering to play card games, more specifically Yu-Gi-Oh! I did play the Sacred Stones, and I've been debating getting Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the I don't know what it's called, but I have to look into if it has a story and everything like that. But that's why I decided to get the trading card game. I also do own Thronebreaker, the Gwent card game from The Witcher. So another case of I'd rather own it, and even if it might take me a little bit to actually play it, at least I own it, versus not owning it and then regretting it. Sonic Triple Trouble for the Game Gear, Super Castlevania 4, Super Mario Brothers 2, Super Mario Land 3, Wario Land. So I got Super Mario Brothers 2 and Wario Land for nostalgic purposes. Actually, in fact, I never played Super Mario Land 3 personally. I've only played Wario Land 2 and 3, which I was going to mention later on. And I got those two games because I did grow up with the Game Boy Color versions. So for nostalgic purposes. And I've as someone who's never played Super Mario Land 3 and Wario Land, I've heard good things about it. And why not play the game where Wario is first starring in his first... let me start over. Why not play the game where Wario is starring in his first platformer? He did have Wario Woods, but that wasn't a platformer. That was just a puzzle game. So moving on. Super Metroid 2, Super Punch-Out. Same case of rather own it and not regret it. Always hear great things about Super Metroid 2 and great things about Super Punch-Out as well. I never played Super Punch-Out, but it would be great to have something where I could dabble and generate a little bit of experience. Sorry guys, my cat was on the floor. That's why I looked down. But yeah, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. I do own the Switch version. I decided to get the Virtual Console version just to compare the differences between the two. And also, I'm not going to lie, I do really like that classic retro aesthetic that Link's Awakening has. I was going to say 8-bit, but I don't think it is 8-bit, right? I'm not 100% sure what Game Boy Color, what bit they were able to output. Moving on, I also do have Legend of Zelda Seasons and Ages. And then lastly, I've already mentioned it, Wario Land 2 and 3. So all the games that I just listed, those are the ones that I did not yet own into this past week and a half, give or take. And I decided to get those games because, again, I'd rather own them and regret not owning them in the future. The one game that I'm thinking about owning that I still don't own is Luigi's Mansion 2 Dark Moon. I just have to do some more light research just to figure out if I do actually want to own it and play it, or if I'm just experiencing fear of missing out. I did my best to make sure the games that I did purchase, the games that I personally am invested in, and I do want to play. I didn't want to just get games just to get them. Like for example, I don't have Ace Attorney or Professor Layton because I'm not really into puzzle games. Um, did I want to buy them? Yeah, a little bit, but I chose not to because again, I'm not typically into that genre of style of video gaming. The only uh, what's it called? I'm sorry. The only I was going to say virtual novel. Visual novel. The only visual novel that I do own will be Digimon Survive, and even then, there's still elements of SRPG gameplay, so like Fire Emblem. And besides that, the next closest visual novel I own is the Legend of Heroes series. But again, I only say it's a visual novel is because it has a lot of dialogue and a lot of reading, but I don't mind that whatsoever. But the gameplay is still a big function of the series, so that's not really a visual novel. Anywho, if you guys ended up buying anything from the Nintendo eShop, please let me know what you bought. Even though it's too late for me to go back and get anything, if you felt like I made a mistake by not purchasing something, let me know. Maybe I'll go ahead and get the physical version if possible. And if not, then I'll just have to settle with watching YouTube videos about it. So thanks so much for listening. It's unfortunate that the eShop is finally closing, but hopefully you were able to generate a lot of memories and games purchased through it, both Nintendo published games that have physical editions and also just eShop exclusives as well. Have a great day. Take care, everyone, and make sure you don't just buy to buy. Do some light research and ask yourself, do I want to own this game? And do I want to play it in the future? Yes or no? Right. Again, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.